Hey, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I think that's all the greetings I can ponder up today. If you're joining us for Dawn Patrol, Dust Patrol, our YouTube channel, welcome. My name is Randy Carter with Men's Ministry, and I have missed you guys. It seems like it's been forever since we've been together as a community, and so much has happened since we met last. I remember our last meeting and just having the bear hugs, the fist bumps, praying together, having a meal together, and then the pandemic hit. Then everything kind of stopped. So, before all this right here started, we were in this series called the Awakening series and studying the life of King David and just reflecting back even on the message last week that Duran prepared regarding grace, but just looking at David's life as a whole and seeing a young lad who took on a giant. I just think about the faith and the courage it took to do that. To lose it all. Some of you right now may have lost a job, or a marriage is in disarray, or a death in the family. And, you look at King David and he loses everything almost in an instance. He loses his wife, loses his house, loses his job, loses everything. And just the faith that he had and the trust he had, that God would come through, was just an amazing time. And so now we carry on from last week from this that Duran talked about as far as grace. And this week we see a change. I think throughout this whole series, this is probably the first time we actually see King David being a human. I don't know if you guys remember, but Rocky IV, love all the Rocky movies. And this is for Duran especially. But Rocky IV, he's fighting Ivan Drago. Maybe not be pronouncing the word right, but anyway, he's fighting, he's taking a pounding, and later on into the fight, though, he makes this hook, and he cuts him. And the trainer brings him over to the side after the bell rings, and Tony is his name, not Tony Banks, but Tony. And Tony says, you cut him. You made him bleed. See, he's not a machine, he's a man. And I think tonight, that's what I want to look at, or today rather, just that we see a glimpse of King David being human. We've seen him up on this pedestal and how he's reacted since he's been young and how he's reacted now later on in life. And he's been through a lot. He's been on the run. And again, everything that he's done, just to try to measure up to something like that, I'm like, oh, Lord, not even close. But again, seeing his humanness and just appreciate the fact that, the Bible gives us a glimpse of the good as well as the weak moments, in our lives. And this was certainly one for David that we're going to look at. But, as you look at David and, you kind of look at everything he's been through, when he does take a turn or when he does fall, if you will, it's so subtle. The title of the message I actually titled is Keeping Watch. And I think it's just a reminder that no matter what spiritual journey we're on, a spiritual high, things are going good, we're winning our battles, and then all of a sudden, when we let our guard down, something can change. And a great reminder again throughout the text of King David being just that. I mean, again, he's won all these battles, both against the giant as well as just life. And all of a sudden he comes to a weak moment in his life. And that's kind of what I want to look at. I mean, he lets his guard down, and certainly the devil uses those times right there. So when we're cut, when our humanness or the man comes out of us, and we're kind of at a weak moment, and that's what I want to look at. How in the world can we fall into a trap or snare just by being kind? Did you hear that right? Yes. King David is simply being kind to someone, and all of a sudden that changes everything. What do I mean by that? Well, if before we get into the text, maybe you dealt with this before. Maybe you fell into a scheme of just trying to be nice to somebody, and it didn't go well. And I think back in my life, just a few examples. Maybe you spoke a kind word to somebody, and it didn't go well. And I remember when I first moved out here from Georgia, shocker, from Georgia. When I first moved out here, I said yes, ma'am, to someone. Somebody was helping me, this young lady, and so I said, thank you, ma'am. You would have thought that I insulted her unbelievably. And that was just simply not the case. That was how I was brought up. I brought up with respect, to respect my elders. And the way you did that, you say yes, sir, or no, sir, or yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, no matter the age, just to show respect. So she got on to me because I said, ma'am. She says, don't call me that. And I almost finished by saying yes, ma'am, once again. So anyway, lesson learned. The other thing, maybe you've been kind to someone and you went out of your way to help them, and it went unnoticed. Or it kind of seemed like a slap in the face because they didn't take it as help. And, I remember when before we moved out here, I lived in Moultrie, and I worked for a construction and forestry dealership, and we had really big forklifts that would really pick up a whole truck, and logs included. And one morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, there's a storm, and I get a phone call, and it's from the police department, and they said, hey, we had this really bad wreck out here, and we were just wondering if it was possible that you could come help us. We noticed you have this big equipment over there, and we have this 18-wheeler that's turned over, and we have a lot of our officers out there, directing traffic, and we know it's only going to get busier as the day goes on. So I was, again, 4 o'clock, wanted to say no, truthfully, but I got up and came there and helped them out, grabbed the forklift and lifted up this truck and, went about my business. And I don't know whether it was a few weeks or about a month later, I remember getting a phone call from my brother. My nephew was being born, and it was on a Sunday. And I'm like, I really need to go in and wrap some things up at work. So I went into work, and I went to a Hardee's, much like a Jack in the Box here, to get a sandwich. And I just followed the car in front of me. The car in front of me pulled out of the lot, went across this little clay road, and then turned left, and this was a divided highway. And I followed the car, turned left, and then next thing you know, I see lights behind me. And I'm certainly not speeding. I just turned out of this thing, and did I do something wrong? I truly did not realize I did anything wrong. Officer pulls me over and says, you know why I stopped you? And I said, well, no, I'm certain I wasn't speeding. And he says, well, you just crossed the divided highway back there when you pulled out of Hardee's. You can't do that. You have to go to the red light and make a U-turn. You can't just drive across. And I said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And so he wrote me a ticket. Now imagine that. I was being kind to someone just a few weeks before, keeping their officers, out of the rain, trying to keep them safe, and the kindness wasn't met with something I wanted to see. So regardless of the circumstance, when we're trying to be kind, when we're trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus, sometimes evil responses or actions kind of come about. It can actually cause us to stumble and fall hard. And if we're not careful, the devil will just use that fuel, to bring us further down into disarray. Some of the fuels that I think of that the devil uses, our tempers flare. Then things are said. James 1:9 says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. In other words, slow it down. The other thing I see as far as fuel that the devil can use through this is anger creeps in, and it starts to consume us. It's one of the things we're going to look at tonight. Psalms 37:8 says, stop being angry, turn from your rage, do not lose your temper, it only leads to harm. And then the last thing I see is just the revenge resulting in some damaging consequences. If we're not careful, what we do can really have some long-term consequences. And Romans 12:9 says, dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. The Lord says, I will take revenge. I will pay them back. Only because we're trying to show someone kindness. That's where the place we are tonight with King David. 1 minute, he's a spiritual giant, full of faith, full of grace, full of patience. And then the next thing, he's cut. And he realizes he's just a man. That can happen to you and I. How does he respond? What can we learn from a man after God's own heart? That's what I hope to unpack tonight as we continue into the text. If you will, join with me in 1 Samuel 25. If you can grab your Bibles, 1 Samuel 25. I won't read everything because of the time that we have together, so I will kind of tell the story a little bit. Samuel dies. King David and his men, they go to the wilderness to hang out. And there's this man there named Nabal. And Nabal's a wealthy man. Says he has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He's pretty wealthy. And David and his men, why Nabal has his shepherds out there watching over the sheep, David and his men actually set up a wall around these guys and really protected them while they was out there. And this wasn't something that David was expecting anything in return. This is just something that folks did during those times. And part of doing that, when it came time to shear the sheep, typically the master or the owner of these sheep would pay back those people who were actually watching over their shepherds. And I think David had kind of a heart of it in itself because he's been a shepherd. He knew what it was like to watch over the sheep and try to keep the animals away and try to keep the thieves away. And, he and his men, built this wall around him. The other person in the text is Abigail, who is Nabal's wife. Says she was really beautiful and she was also wise. The other thing about Nabal, it says he's a fool. And it doesn't mean he wasn't smart. It simply means that from a fool perspective, and at least the text I look at, it actually means he doesn't believe in God, in which you can kind of see that from some of his reactions as we look at something. Again, David just simply trying to be kind, coming off this spiritual high, if you will, of everything going on. And again, as Duran showed last night, just the grace he showed on King Saul, because it wasn't his time to be king. The Lord put him as king, and it wasn't up to David to take that away. And so as we look at tonight, we look at David and how he responds to Nabal. So he sends his guys to go to Nabal and say, hey, by the way, I've watched over everything, and he's so kind. I mean, his words, just says, if you will, please, if you have anything extra, send it with my guys. And he basically says, who is this fellow David? Nabal says. Well, of course, everybody knew who David was right there. Then he sneers and said to the young man, who does this son of Jesse think he is? There are a lot of servants these days who run away from their masters. Should I take my bread and my water and my meat, then and slaughter for my shears and give it to a hand of outlaws who come from who knows where? So David's young men returned and told him what Nabal had said. Watch David here now. Here's something to really note. Our reaction can change it all, but we have to be aware that it's happened. And who knows what's going on right now in David's life? Again, Samuel just passing away. Maybe he's hungry. Who knows? But something just set him off just because of these guys coming back. And I don't think it was anything. Could be pride, maybe a little bit. Hey, I'm the next king of Israel, and you're going to treat my men, you're going to treat me like that? And so what does he do? Well, it says, get your swords. David says, strap them on. He takes 400 men, including himself, and leaves the 200 behind to watch guard. That may be a little bit of overkill there. And then jump ahead to verses 21, 22, and then we're going to come back. And it says this, David had just been saying a lot of good it did to help this fellow. So much for being nice. That really didn't go too far. We protected his flocks in the wilderness, and nothing he owned was lost or stolen. But he has repaid me evil for good. May God strike me and kill me if even one man of his household is still alive tomorrow morning. Wow. Just like that. He'd just been saying how, again, patience and how spiritually he was. And the next thing you know, he's ready to just annihilate this whole family, this man, and then everybody that's part of his family. Totally disregards the Lord. You remember back in Romans with regards to, hey, vengeance is mine. Let me take care of it. There's nothing you need to do. I've got this. But no, he disregards that. And, I think it's also a reminder that, it's not his battle to fight. He could have simply just let the Lord take care of it. But he immediately, it goes back to that fuel. His temper flares, and then he gets angry, and now he wants revenge, and he's ready just to take care of everybody. But then watch what happens. As the Lord is always true to his promises, he comes through for David. he sends a strong woman of faith named Abigail, Nabal's wife, to run interference. Not only for the sake of, King David, I think, think of all the people who were there. And as you look at verses 14 through 20, Abigail quickly, these guys, they come back to Abigail and say, hey, Nabal really treated the King David's guys really bad. And these guys did nothing but good. They were so kind to us the whole time we were out there in the wilderness. We didn't lose anything. And this guy was a jerk to them. He was so harsh. And Abigail, knowing, well, this is the king of Israel, and also she was a strong woman of faith. I mean, when you really look at women in the Bible, of course you think of Mary, you think of Esther, you think of other folks. I haven't for once thought that much of Abigail until really studying this text and realized what she did. She really helped David tremendously. The Lord used her in a powerful way, and she really saved her whole family and every male that was part of that. Because David was ready to go down and kill him. And she steps in and just runs interference. And she grabs everything. She doesn't stop to pray about anything. She already knows how Nabal is. Again, she knows he's a fool. He doesn't believe in God. So she goes and grabs all of these things, and she goes down to meet David. And if you just look at the text right here, what she says. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed low before him. She fell at his feet and said, I accept all blame in this matter, my lord. She doesn't try to put the blame on Nabal. She owns it. Please listen to what I have to say. I know Nabal is a wicked and ill-tempered man. Please don't pay any attention to him. He is a fool, just as his name suggests, but I never even saw the young man you sent. Now, my lord, as surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, since the Lord has kept you from murdering and taking vengeance into your own hands, let all your enemies and those who try to harm you to be accursed as Nabal is. And here is a present that I, your servant, have brought to you and your young men. Please forgive me if I have offended you in any way. The Lord will surely reward you with a lasting dynasty, for you are fighting the Lord's battles. You have not done wrong throughout your entire life. Even when you are chased by those who seek to kill you, your life is safe in the care of the Lord, your God, secure in his treasure pouch. But the lives of your enemies will disappear like stones shot from a sling. When the Lord has done all he promised and has made you leader of Israel, don't let this be a blemish on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed in vengeance. And when the Lord has done these great things for you, please remember me, your servant. You look at Abigail, and again, I'm also reminded that, we all need an Abigail in our lives to run interference, to see when we really have stepped over and we fall. We get cut. And, Chuck Swindoll had this amazing thing. He says, and I quote him, someone has a word in season for a blind spot in our lives. Someone has a word in season for a blind spot in our lives. Meaning, no matter what we're going through right now, there's something that you can offer somebody. And you can ride interference and help that person who maybe has fallen, who's cut, who's just having a bad day. And again, just like David, so quickly going from spiritual giant to temper, anger, and ready just to have revenge and murder somebody. And then Abigail steps in, and the Lord sends her at just the right time. How does David respond? And I think this is one of the greatest teaching moments right here, just how he responds. And I think, again, he goes down from going really high to really low. And just how he responds right here, I think, helps me as I deal with things like this, especially with anger and different things that sometimes I let, fester and get out of control. Verses 32 through 38 says, and David replied to Abigail, praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you to meet me today. Thank God for your good sense. Bless you from keeping me from murder and from carrying out vengeance with my own hands. For I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, who has kept me from hurting you, that if you had not hurried out to meet me, not one of Nabal's men would still be alive tomorrow morning. Then David accepted her presents and told her, return home in peace. I have heard what you said. We will not kill your husband. You know, the first thing I see here is a simple fact that David listens to her. You know, who is Abigail to come to the next king? And David doesn't know her. What courage did it would take her to go meet the king, the next king of Israel, and offer these goods as a result of him, Nabal, actually being so harsh to his guys. And she has the courage to do that. She goes down here. And the other part I see on David is that he listens. He doesn't stop to interrupt her. He simply listens to what she has to say. And I think that says a lot about David. You know, rather than being prideful and just saying, I don't want to hear a word you're saying, I'm going to go ahead and do this right here, he stops. And a lot of times I think as we get angry, one of the best things we can do is just stop and let the Lord speak to us, or let somebody else, an Abigail, again, speak to us, whether it be a friend, a spouse, a co-worker, whoever. And that takes that really says a lot about David. She really takes a man after God's own heart. So many times we could diffuse a situation if we just stop and we listened. And sometimes that's hard to do. That leads us to the second thing. If you're going to listen, but not only is he listening, he's also still being teachable. You know, again, here's the king, the next king of Israel, but he's still learning to grow. He's not stopping. You know, he lets this lady come in and speak what he really wanted to do and kill this guy. She held him up on the pedestal and said, hey, don't get any blemish on your records. Don't do this. And he listens to her, but he also uses that as a teaching moment, I think, as well. I mean, here's these guys. You can imagine being all these guys. So he already has 400 guys around him, swords strapped on, ready to go down and kill this dude. And he has to sit there and consider, well, are they going to think I'm weak if I stop? And I think for him and what he showed these guys, these misfits. These are the guys who eventually are going to be the mighty men of Israel. So he's continuing to teach them as he's being taught. And I think it's a beautiful thing. No macho attitude, hey, you can't teach me type thing. That's a stupid person. That's a fool. That was probably Nabal. And then the last thing I see here, David just shows humility. He praises God for sending Abigail to meet him. Then he accepts her present, and then he just sends her home in peace, not knowing what's going to happen, just sending her home in peace and turning around and going the other way. That's hard sometimes when you're trying to be kind to somebody and all of a sudden it just comes back and slaps you in the face. Back to my ticket in Moultrie, you can imagine me sitting in the car, officer writing me a ticket. And you know what he says? He says, hey, aren't you the guy who helped us that morning when it was raining and picked up that truck for us and like at 4 o'clock in the morning? I'm like, yep, I was that guy. And I wanted to just, I can't tell you how much anger, how my temper was just flaring inside. And truthfully, I didn't do anything, or I didn't think I did anything wrong. I didn't realize I did anything wrong. It wasn't like I meant to break the law. Never even had a ticket at that point. And so, oh my goodness, what was I going to do? Was I going to let it fester with me? And I'm sure it did fester. It's been a while, but I'm sure it festered in me quite a bit. Not knowing what was going to happen. I'm going to have to pay this ticket. My insurance is going to go up. I'm young. What am I going to do? And the officer even told me, he says, you know what? Hey, I've already wrote this ticket. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. He says, just go to the courthouse. I won't do anything. I won't show up to argue against the ticket. Well, I had no clue what to do. So I show up at the courthouse, and lo and behold, the judge who's going over the proceedings, if you will, is my Sunday school teacher. And I remember him looking down at the docket and saying, Randall Carter. And he kind of just looks up. And I'm just like, oh, Lord, really? And so I go up there and he says, Mr. Carter, what happened? And I told him what happened. And he says, well, pay 2 cans of food and all charges are dropped. I could have really used that. The tempers could have flared. The angers could have gotten inside of me. I could have really just, been really revengeful for being stopped. and not letting the Lord come in, recognizing that the Lord, He can fight our battles. We don't have to fight them. We don't have to fight them. When you do what is right, God has a way of working things out. We just need to trust Him. There's traps out there. Keep watch, not only for yourself, but for others. Thank you for joining me. Love you guys. Miss you. Hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Hey guys, thanks again for joining us for Dawn Patrol and Dusk Patrol. That was such an amazing message from Randy. I love the idea just at the end that there are so many traps set out for us. And when those traps are sprung and we want that reaction, oftentimes we get angry, we get mad, and we want to get revenge, or we want to have justice. Randy reminded us that sometimes it's not about that action and being vocal and being angry. It's to stop, to pause, to listen. And I think the big thing that I'm been learning about in this season is to remain teachable in it. Just like our story with King David, he listened to Abigail and he remained teachable in that moment, that he didn't have to play out his plans the way he had it set. He stayed teachable by God, where God showed him another way. And that's where I've been struggling. That all these things that come up, things that make me angry, these traps that have been set for me, and I want to react. I want just to go for it and do what I think is right. But God keeps telling me, no, I got a different way for you. And the idea of remain teachable, man, there's been a lot of times where my wife, Annie, comes alongside me and starts talking to me about, man, what's going on? And she gives me a different perspective. And sometimes I just want to be angry with her and say, no, you don't understand what's going on. But then again, when I sit, listen, and remain teachable, I often see the other side of the story, or the other way of reacting to this situation. And most oftentimes, it is a better way. But this idea that God has a different plan for us, and if we just listen, don't react in anger, and remain teachable, those traps that come from whoever, God's going to prepare us to act in the way He wants us to, so we bring Him glory. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. But here's the thing, we're not done yet. We are still joining up in the Zoom groups this week like we did last week. We're going to have some time for discussion questions right now. So go ahead and click the link that's showing up in the chat box right now and go ahead and join our Zoom group. I'll be in there welcoming you guys, and then I'll let you guys know what's going on and give you the questions that we're talking about today. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys in the Zoom group or next week. Later.